I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The lifestyle medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being. All right, welcome, Simon. Good to see you again. How you doing, brother?
Very well, thank you. Very well.
That's good.
Very well.
That's good. Hey, I've got a little thing that I came across the other day that just made me laugh and laugh and laugh. And I like to. Do you like to laugh? I like to laugh.
Absolutely.
All right. So here it is. This I think.
So can I just clarify? Are you promising I'm going to laugh here?
No, I can never promise you're going to laugh, but I'll give it a red hot go. But I think what I find so funny about this, it just speaks volumes about humanity, I think. So unfortunately, we can't, on the podcast, we can't show the graphic, but you just have to imagine in your mind's eye here. So imagine a map of the United States. And then what Google have done is published on a particular date, and it was April the 8th, 2024, so last year. They Googled they have a little density map for how many people Googled for solutions to eyes hurting. Right now, I know that you've had a lot of eye issues in your time, but this. None
of it involved pain, interestingly. But
no, well, that's a beautiful thing. But this was so people had Googled disproportionately large volumes of people had Googled eyes hurting, solutions for eyes hurting. But here's the interesting thing: when you look at the map of the United States, there's this line, like a diagonal line across the United States, and you can see that on that line on the diagonal, from sort of starting from the east. Going all the way down to the bottom at the west there was this density, this you can see it's very clear on the density map, a proliferation of these Google searches for eyes hurting. And you think, what's this about? This doesn't make any sense. Why would there be a diagonal line, and right down that diagonal line, this high number of people Googling solutions for hurting eyes?
Well,
Simon,
I think I've got an idea.
Any ideas? Yeah, what's the idea?
I think I do, and the idea kind of frightens me, really. So
it should. Yeah, tell me, what's your idea?
Well, I mean, the thing that's kind of in my mind as an obvious explanation for this, which may not be the explanation, but it does seem a likely candidate, is that from the point of view of an observer on the ground, something like the moon or the sun would track across the sky from one side of the country to the other. And I suspect if someone were to stare at the sun, perhaps looking at a phenomenon like an eclipse for a prolonged period of time, you would get sore eyes.
You are right onto it, man. You are right on it. So when you actually, they show for the preceding day where the solar eclipse occurred, and it is this perfectly correlated diagonal line across the United States. At the day after, there are all these searches for hurting eyes. Now, doesn't this say something about us humans? Like, how many times are we told, hey, people, all right, there's going to be a solar eclipse, all right, but don't stare at the sun. It's not good for your retinas, all right? So what happens? Everyone's outside looking up going, I can't look away. Look at this. And not only that, it's like, hey, Harold, get out here. Check this out. And he's like, I don't know that we're meant to be looking at that, but look at it. And so here we go. Yeah.
So it's another. At some level, it's another expression of the wet paint sign, isn't it?
That's right.
And
yes.
I think when you put those two things together, in some ways, what you're looking at is the shadow side of curiosity in humans.
Yeah, that's true. The dark side. Well, it certainly gets dark when you stare at the sun long enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, this we could talk about a whole lot about what this means as a psychological phenomenon. But what I do want to talk about is light, because I've actually developed quite an interest in this topic over the last sort of few weeks. Now, I've always been interested in light because I think that it's one of the, sunlight and the benefits of sunlight is sort of something that doesn't feature often in our talk around health and in the lifestyle medicine space. Although, with the whole move towards talking about nature as medicine, as perhaps one of the pillars of lifestyle medicine, we're hearing more of it. But even, I remember going back, probably nearly 10 years ago now. I remember when we were developing the LIFT project, actually taking a real interest in the science underpinning this idea that we need light, we need access to light, particularly for mental health. But there's some other fascinating applications of exposure to light coming through as well. Collectively, this thing is referred to as photobiomodulation. Mm-hmm. And what we know is there seems to be, there's really good evidence emerging for getting adequate brightness to light. So we might talk about that first. Yep. And then the second thing, there's a lot more interest now in the type of light, and particularly we're talking about where it sort of sits on the spectral frequency.
Okay, it's kind of lumens as a function of brightness.
Yes,
and colour on the spectrum.
Exactly. So what we've known, most of us are familiar with the whole SAD phenomena, that seasonal affective disorder. Yeah. And, obviously as a psychologist, you'd be well acquainted with that. Although I don't know that you've probably worked in parts of the world where it's very, very problematic. But I actually remember doing a presentation up in Canada one time, close to Alaska. And there was a lady there that said to me, in our town, she was from Alaska. She said, in our town, we actually do fundraising to send certain families and people for a holiday in the middle of winter down to Florida. And I think that actually even attracted some government grants for this, because what we know, short story, is that when our brain doesn't receive adequate sort of brightness of lights, and this happens obviously in those countries of high latitude during those prolonged winter months. We know that depression's very high, suicidal ideation is very high, and that she was arguing that it's cost effective. It's more cost effective to actually send people on holidays down to Florida in the middle of winter than to engage in some other
kind of traditional sort of treatment.
Yes, that's correct. So not a bad public health policy. I certainly would put my hand up for that, I think. But the question is, how much light do we need? And I'm a little bit proud of myself here, Simon. I'm not often that I'm proud of myself, but when I was developing the LIFT project, this was probably back, and actually wrote about this, or actually published the book in 2016. So it's nearly 10 years ago. I was actually looking at the literature starting to come out, and I had to have a guess as to what sort of exposure to light do we probably need. And it was sort of fairly scant, the literature back then, but I had a guess that we probably needed to be exposed to about 10,000 lux of light. Now, lux is a measure of the brightness of light. And what's been super encouraging is that over the past decade, that seems to be, so we're still not locked in yet, but it seems to be, there's more studies showing that when you apply about 10,000 lux for about 20 to 30 minutes of each day, that seems to be very helpful. In fact, there's some studies actually showing that when you actually encounter bright light therapy, and this is actually even for non-seasonal depressive disorder, there seems to be marked improvements. In fact, some studies have even shown comparable to antidepressant medication, which is interesting. So that 10,000 lux number seems to, I feel like I sort of got it a little bit right. But there's been some new insight on that.
Is this does this mean that on average an individual person only needs about 10,000 lux for about 30 minutes per day?
Yes, that's
to provide adequate light to
be psychologically well. So we've got this cluster of cells sitting up the top of our optic nerve, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, detecting how much light our eyes are being exposed to. By the way, people, just tuck this away. That does not mean staring at the sun, even if it's obscured by the moon. But just the intensity of the light in the spaces that we're immersed in. It seems that, and certainly for the as the sort of a deliberate therapy, particularly with people with depression, that 10,000 lux for 20 to 30 minutes, typically in the morning, seems to be, work well. So, there was actually some other studies done where they found that that when they took people with, affective conditions and took them out into nature and actually took them camping, and this was even during winter time, and they monitored how much light they were being exposed to, it turned out there were pockets where they were getting about 10,000 lux. And, a lot of their symptomology improved a lot. So sort of tuck that number away. But here's another way to interpret it. And this is sort of more recent, which is starting to emerge, is that 10,000 lux for about 20 to 30 minutes seems to be very helpful. But if you express that another way, if you talked about lux hours, so what we could say is that 10,000 lux for half an hour would be 5,000 lux hours.
5,000 lux hours. Yeah, okay. I get that.
Yeah. So what seems to be the case is that a good goal, and once again, the data is still emerging in this space, but aiming for about 3,000 lux hours over the course of the day seems to be, what's most helpful to us. So, for example, if you were, let's say you're awake for 10 hours, let's say you slept a lot. If you're awake for 10 hours, if you could be in a space that had about 300 lux and you're exposed to that for 10 hours, well, it's 300 times 10. There's your 3,000 lux hours.
Yeah.
So here's the question: where do we get that from? And what's so interesting is that the difference between outdoor spaces and indoor spaces is phenomenal. So, for example,
I suspect it's a really sharp drop as you come indoors, or increase as you go outdoors.
That's correct.
More than you might sort of subjectively think.
That's so
true. For
true.
example, I'm sitting indoors right now with a couple of lights on, looking outdoors, and as I'm looking at it now, it doesn't feel like there's that much more light outdoors. But I suspect there probably is.
It is, and it's deceptive, because you think, oh, this is a brightly lit space in here, not that much different to outside. But when you actually look at the numbers, and I'll rattle off some of the numbers here. So, sitting in a dim light, candle lit room, you're probably looking at about 10 to 50 lux, right? So that's very, very low lighting. So you can imagine if you were in that kind of space.
You need 60 hours per day of 50 lux to, okay.
That's exactly right. So you start to do the sums and you realise, wow. In a living room, so a typical living room, normally about 50 to 150 lux. So that's low lighting. And you think about this. So let's make that an average of 100 lux. Do you know what? Even if you're awake for 24 hours,
you're still
missing the mark. You're not getting that, that nominal figure of 3,000 lux hours a day. Yeah. An office space, which is, brightly lit, normally there's it can be sort of in the order of about 300 to 500 sometimes, if it's very brightly lit space. So once again, you have to be, by the time you take out your sleeping hours, nominally we might have sort of 15, 16 hours, 17 hours of time in lit environments. We need to be intentional about this, I think. If you look at an operating theatre, because they want to see what they can do. They want to. It's important. That can be in the order of about 1,000, even up to 2,000 lux. That's a very brightly lit space. Sitting next to a window with the sun fully beaming in, because it's as light comes in, it's dispersed and dimmed. So in that space, you can have sort of in the order of about 1,000, even potentially up to 5,000 lux. So that's pretty good. So windows are good.
So 5,000 is sitting by a window.
Yes, full sun beaming in on you. Yep. So it can be up to that kind of range.
Okay.
So you might only need that for an hour to be doing well. Yeah. But get this. Outside, how much do you think? You probably know the answer to this already, but outdoors, bright sunny day.
I don't know the answer, but I'm going to guess.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities, and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
So, for example, where I'm living right now, the general rule of thumb is that every single day has a cloudless, severe blue sky with bright sun between, about 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Just at this time of year. I would guess that from those figures that we talked about, 10 to 50 and so on up to about 5,000. My guess is once you step outside, it increases almost exponentially. So probably to something like, I don't know, 80 to 100,000 or something like that.
You are a clever man. It's actually, on a bright sunny day, you can have up to 100,000 lux that you're exposed to. And what's interesting, even once again, this is not staring at the sun. This is just the ambient, light that you're brightness. Even in the shade and standing under a tree on a really bright sunny day, probably 25,000 lux. So you can see if you're gunning for the 3,000 lux hours a day, which seems to be this nominal goal that we could pursue, happens real quick out there.
You can get it in just a few minutes.
And you know what? I think this is a really, really good message, to communicate. And once again, it speaks volumes about the value of just getting outside, even if that means eating our lunch outside, sitting under a tree. That exposure to bright light. Here's the interesting. What do you think? What do you think a laptop screen or a desktop monitor? What do you think they provide?
So if you have the brightness, say, dialed right up, straight in your eyes. Now I feel like I'm going to get caught out here. So because on the one hand we talk about avoiding the brightness of screens, but on the other hand, they're probably not that bright in the lux terms that we're talking about. So I don't know, maybe 500.
It's probably closer to about 150.
Oh, okay, even less.
So it's low, which is surprising, I know, but you know what that means is that if you are aiming for 3,000 lux hours throughout the course of the day, and you're sitting in front of a screen that's emitting, and there's no other sort of other sources that are bolstering that, 150 lux, there's 20 hours.
20 hours.
20 hours.
So that sounds like a good lifestyle choice to me then.
That wasn't the moral.
Sit in front of a computer screen for 20 hours a day. What's
done.
The problem?
Well, so anyway, I think this is really interesting, and the idea that the brightness of light plays a really important part. Hey, one thing I will add to this, and in fact, I should say too, and I have no shareholdings in any of this, but you can actually get light emitting devices. So interestingly enough, they will emit typically about 10,000 lux. And so these devices, you can purchase them. You sit them to the side of you, typically in the morning whilst you're reading the paper or eating your breakfast, and they recommend 20 to 30 minutes of this. Once again, around that sort of 3 to 5,000 lux hours. But one thing I do want to say, I love this study. I don't know if you ever saw this when it came out, and it was published in JAMA. So this is a high-powered ranking journal. 2019, researchers from the National Institute of Health too had done a study. But you know what they found is that whilst exposure to bright light is highly valuable, don't do it at night time. Because what they found is that artificial light, exposure to artificial light at night, so the artificial light at night, ALAN, abbreviated ALAN.
Oh, yeah, ALAN.
Right,
yeah.
So ALAN, it's a good one, Alan. Thanks for nothing, Alan. But exposure to light at night is associated with obesity. And obviously, we're not talking about causality here, but get this, this was a large study published in JAMA. They had about 40,000 women, and that when they actually identified those people that had any level of lighting at night, so we're talking about televisions, lights on at night, were typically carried about an extra 5 kilograms. So, that's about 12 pounds, I would say, of body weight. of body weight. And this is a large scale, published in a good journal. So thanks for nothing, Alan.
So the moral is, if your friend Alan wants to talk to you, your answer should be, sure, happy to, but we need to be done by 5 p.m.
That's right. Exactly. So bright light, the intensity of light, there's value in that for during the day, not at night.
Yeah, interesting. So, I can share a couple of personal observations here. What the first is that, we all know that where you and I both used to live, and we used to live, reasonably close to each other. That part of the world, the east coast of Australia, has been experiencing a prolonged. I would, in my own terms, I would call it a shift in climate. I don't want to get into the climate change kind of conversation here. I suspect that's part of it. But, the weather on the east coast of Australia for several years now has been much more characterised by long periods of darkness because of cloud, rain and so on. Where I'm living right now, I think has an average of 36 rainy days per year.
Wow.
And when it's not rainy, the sky really is a severe blue. It's the most extraordinary blue. And anecdotally, my mood has shifted dramatically in the time that I've been here. So I simply wake up each day feeling. All I can say really is different and better. Than before. One of my favourite things to do here, and this kind of aligns with what you're talking about, is to get outside first thing in the morning and run or walk to the gym or cycle to the gym or something like that. So straight away I'm getting that hit of natural light. I couldn't do it this morning, of course, because you wanted me to come and podcast. So I'm trapped inside under about 150 lux at the moment. But normally I would head outside. And at the other end of the spectrum, my house for the whole time my wife and I have been married, which is heading for 35 years now, we have always had lamps and dimmer switches in the houses that we've lived in. So in the evenings, I just never have anything other than lamplight or a fully dimmed light, just enough to kind of be able to see what you're doing. Even if I'm cooking, if I'm cooking after the sun has gone down, I'll tend to put a lamp on in the corner of the kitchen and cook by that because I simply don't like that really bright night light.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. I don't want the message to be here, hey, go out there and maximize the day and use whatever sources you can, because later in the day, obviously we want to get our lux hours throughout the course of the day, but later in the day there's actually real value in that slowing it down, and particularly taking away what we can talk about in just a moment, particular color of light. I did a speaking presentation the other day, and it was at a beautiful venue. I walked into the room and they had all of the curtains down, all the blinds down, and these with them up, it was just this fantastic panoramic view of outdoor spaces and lots of natural light coming in. And the first thing I did is I wasn't the first presenter, and I said, can we raise all the blinds? And as I did, you just heard this collective people coming back to life. So there's real value in that. I would say, so we're talking about the brightness of light. I think there's really good evidence now showing the value and the importance of us receiving adequate brightness of light throughout the course of the day. And what's alarming is that so many of us, like the average adult, spends over 90%. I think it's around 94% of their time indoors. and that's not where you're going to optimize and find this, these ideal levels of brightness. So it's a simple behavior, and I think this is a message we need to communicate more. Just go and play outside more, like your mum used to tell you. Just even if it's sitting outside eating your lunch, we know that you're immersed in a lot more light intensity, which has benefits. So the brightness of light, I think it's pretty evidence based. I think there's good studies showing there's real value in that. This next one is probably a little more emerging. So I've got that caveat before we go ahead. So we've talked about brightness, but the type of light, specifically with regards to colour, some really interesting work that's coming out of this space. And just for, to give the simple science lesson again, everyone remembers that we have this radiation into us, which is waves that are going all around. They have different frequencies, and linked to their frequency, or inversely related to the frequency they go up and down, is how long the wavelengths are. And we know that depending on how long the wavelengths are, determines how far they can travel and what they can travel through. And then how rapidly the wavelength goes up and down, the frequency influences how much sort of energy is in it and how much damage it can potentially do. And so there's this broad spectrum of different frequencies, all the way down from sort of radio waves, which are very slow but very penetrating, hence they can find their way into our homes through walls and all the rest of it, all the way up to like ultraviolet and X-rays and gamma rays, which are very high frequency and potentially very, very damaging. Whereas the radio waves, they're so slow, they can get through stuff, but they're not that damaging because the energy intensity is not. Of that huge gamut of sort of frequencies and that are available, there's a very thin slither,
tiny bit,
that we can see, and we call this the visible light range. And at one end of the spectrum, we have, of our thin visible light range, we have the longer wavelength, not as high frequency, less damaging, if you like, and that's the colour red. And obviously anything below that is referred to as infrared, so below red. And then up at the top end of our sort of visible spectrum, this was a bit educational for me. I probably should have realised this, but it says something about my education level. But the other end of the spectrum, I always thought was blue, but it's not actually blue. It's violet.
Violet,
So violet is shorter wavelength, shorter wavelength, but more frequency. And if we go beyond, just step outside our visible sort of range, which is the violet, then we go to ultraviolet waves and ultraviolet radiation, and that has another effect, for example. And we don't have time to talk about that now, but it's interesting. The ultraviolet, so just outside that upper end of our visible range, there's health benefits associated with that, clearly, because it's involved in things like vitamin D formation. Obviously, the downside, because of the energy level is quite high, it can be damaging, particularly to our skin. And so it is linked to certain skin cancers. What is interesting, and I won't go stray too far here, but what is interesting is that whilst exposure to ultraviolet radiation is linked to higher skin cancers, which is problematic in countries like Australia that experiences a lot of it, when you look at all-cause mortality, there doesn't seem to be a strong connection. So even though, you are more inclined to get skin cancers and die from that, there seems to be other benefits of that ultraviolet, might be vitamin D production, might just be other confounders, like, people that are getting more ultraviolet radiation and skin cancers are also active outdoors, doing a whole lot of these other things, which might be mitigating some of those other problems. But it is interesting that there doesn't. So some of the studies don't show this strong connection.
This is a good opportunity for a quick science lesson to correct what I think is a common misperception among a lot of people. So we're going to stray even further for a moment. The World Health Organization classifies alcohol as a Group 1 carcinogen. What does that mean? A Group 1 carcinogen? Well, it means that it definitely causes cancer in human beings. Sunlight is also a group 1 carcinogen. But the really important thing here that, in my experience, many people misunderstand is that they believe that this classification or rating, the group 1, relates to the strength of the effect, and it doesn't. This is not a rating of strength of effect. It's a classification of quality and strength of evidence. So we've got lots of evidence to show this link between alcohol and cancer. We've got lots of evidence to show the link between sunlight and cancer. But that doesn't mean that we should avoid sunlight, and be super anxious about getting out in the sun. Of course, we should take the sensible precautions. We can, if you're out in the middle of the day, absolutely use some sunscreen. Don't wear clothing that's going to cover your skin and prevent you from experiencing burns from the sun. And the burn really is just the physical evidence of that energy that you were talking about, isn't it? It's it's just the power of that ultraviolet energy damaging and burning the skin. But I think that the important takeaway here is, first of all, understand what that classification means.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And secondly, don't turn that into a sunlight avoidance strategy.
Yes, yeah, that's good insight. So what's interesting, I find, is that we have these within the visible range. We have the blue light, we have the red light, and what's interesting is
violet light.
The violet light.
Violet light.
So
you should have paid attention in physics class, didn't you?
I should have.
Didn't you ever learn Roy G. Biv?
Roy G. Biv.
Oh, evidently not. Darren.
Physics was my favourite subject in Year 12.
Well, can I say, either you were occupied with something else or your teacher failed. Roy G. Biv. This is the way you remember the colours of the visible light spectrum. So if you can just remember Roy G. Biv, because that's hard to forget, or you can remember the mnemonic, Richard of York gave battle in vain. If you happen to also like history. If you don't like history, just remember Roy G. Biv.
Roy G. Biv.
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet.
Violet's there.
Yeah.
So what we know is that the even though the upper, the blue violet is it's longer wavelength, so it's not as penetrating, but it's higher energy, and so therefore it can cause more damage. Now, for those who just want a fun fact and want to understand why sunsets and sunrises are that bright sort of red yellow color, is because the blue light, because it's not as penetrating, it gets dispersed more by the atmosphere because it's coming in at an angle, has to go through more atmosphere. So we don't see as much of the blue aspect, and that's why it appears red. But anyway, what it means for our skin is that, when it hits our skin, it can be more damaging, but it doesn't go as deep. What it is good for, though, blue light is associated with the middle of the day, and our brains know that that's a good time to be awake. And so blue light, it's well established, reduces like melatonin production. So we tend to feel more alert. And this is why there's this big emphasis now, and most people are aware of the fact that screens typically emit blue light. And this is, if you use them at nighttime, it's a great way to trick your brain into thinking it's actually the daytime. Melatonin, which is causes us to feel sleepy, is reduced, and hence we can struggle to sleep more. So the blue light's an interesting one. I think it's pretty well established and quite valid. We understand that. What I'm finding interesting is what's increasingly emerging with the red light, because what seems to be the case is red light being it's less damaging, so because the energy frequency is less, but the wavelength is longer, so it's more penetrating. And there's some studies suggesting that red light and even infrared light can penetrate like up to 4 centimeters within our tissues of our body.
Wow. So that's into your brain as well.
It is. It's a long way in. And what they're finding, because it's not harmful, it seems that the energy intensity of it's quite low, but it seems to have really interesting properties. Like, for example, stimulating mitochondrial function. Right? These are the energy cells. Also stimulating collagen production. So some of the anti-aging, fraternity have got interested in this, and you can even now understand. I don't have one, as you can tell by my complexion. It probably needs it, but you can actually buy masks now that people will put on and that emit red light and infrared light into their trying to produce, make our skin nice and taut.
Yeah.
But whilst this is an emerging area, and I'm watching it with great interest, there are a couple of studies that have come out which are quite solid. And there's one in particular which I find highly interesting, and that is they found that by exposing quite a large area of someone's back to red and infrared light, it was definitely improving mitochondrial function, which changes energy metabolism. And these people they were responding more effectively, I suppose the way I would say it, to glucose tolerance tests. So it seems that blood sugar levels were controlled, and they actually did these studies also in people with diabetes. So here this is interesting, and I had heard this is probably go back 10 years ago. There was some studies where they were shining lights even onto the back of people's kneecaps and finding these metabolic changes, and I thought that sounds like voodoo here, but there are more studies which are actually showing that the light, particularly red light, can seems to have these properties.
So this again sounds like a good argument for getting most of your light exposure early in the morning or late in the or late in the afternoon.
Yeah,
because first of all, you're predominantly going to be exposed to the red light because the blue light's getting attenuated in the mornings and afternoons.
That's correct. Yes.
Secondly, you're going to accumulate those 3,000 lux hours pretty easily if you get outside early and late. And ideally, of course, if you eat a meal, then go outside in the morning, and if you eat a meal in the evening and then go outside and walk, then you're getting that added benefit of movement after eating. So I think it's a great argument for that. The only caveats I would say is that certainly at those fringe times, it's not just the blue light, that's a violet light that's dispersed, and so we don't see. It's also the ultraviolet radiation, which is good from a skin cancer risk, but it means that if we're looking at, say, vitamin D production, we're not going to be getting as
much.
Less of that.
The other thing is that blue light is really good for attentiveness and wakefulness and high mood. Yeah. So because it's reducing melatonin production. So it's not a bad thing to have, to get out in the blue and green, or the blue spaces. But I think that later in the day, following just the natural order of things, when it's interesting that red light, the blue light dims, and it should be a time when we're, at the end of the day, particularly sunset, it's preparing us to wind down, to feel sleepy, to get more melatonin producing. So anyway, look, I think this is a really interesting topic, and I think we're going to see, more and more and hear more and more about it. I think it's a really powerful way of thinking. This is a simple thing that we can be aware of, that's not hard to initiate, but that can have profound effects. What's interesting, and perhaps to wrap it up, I've got this found this quote from Florence Nightingale. The wise words of this lady, and this is what she said. She said, "Second only to fresh air, because air is pretty important. You need that. I should be inclined to rank light in importance for the sick. Its direct sunlight is necessary for a speedy recovery."
Yeah.
And so, you know what, 150 years, maybe more than that now, she was ahead of her time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, with that said, I'm out to go and accumulate some lux.
Do it, brother. Do it well.
See you soon.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.